Now, in my 5 minutes, I will touch upon 2 points which are connected. The first one, while the Bible has much to say about caring for the poor, it has less to say about unequal distribution of surplus wealth. Now, in fact, the core message from the scriptures is that the wealthy have a duty to care for the poor, rather than that society should work to cope with the distribution of riches. Now, this can be easily understood if we consider the conditions, structural conditions of the times, namely, the times were characterized by what is called primary scarcity, not to be confused with the secondary scarcity. The primary scarcity is due to the fact that let's say, the social and productive mechanisms were not able to produce enough for everybody. That is an objective fact. So somebody had to. So in facing a situation of this type, the only way was to underline compassion and benevolence. That is and that is true even for the church father. In fact, the church father, if we consider Augustine, St. Augustine, seemed to accept that economic shortages as an inherent component of society. Now, when we come to April 2014, Pope Francis came up with a sentence which, to my knowledge, people are not underlined. Perhaps they took it for granted. But the sentence I quote is, inequality is the root of social evil, not poverty, inequality. Now, people took it as just a normal sentence, but that was revolutionary, because it was for the first time that in the Catholic social teaching, such a stance was taken. In other words, if the argument is briefly the following, if inequalities are reduced, even poverty will diminish, but not vice versa. The vice versa is not true at all. You can diminish poverty via redistribution from the rich to the poor, but inequality might, as it is the case in the last 40 years, keep on growing, etc. So that is why perhaps we need to consider that the poverty of today is due not to primary scarcity, but to secondary scarcity, a scarcity which is generated by greed, by avarice and greed behavior. Now, why avarice is a very terrible, dangerous social vice? Not so because there are many other vices, but avarice is terrible because it generates endogenously secondary scarcity. And when that is the case, it is obvious that compassion, benevolence are not enough. We need to move towards justice, because justice means that the social order is based upon rules of the games which do not determine the proper results. In other words, I remember Charles Peirce, the philosopher, American philosopher, the founder of pragmatism. At the end of the 19th century, he published a book whose title is The Gospel of Greed. The Gospel of Greed. Now, if you read that book, you understand many things, what's happening today. Because he said, greed is good. Greed is necessary, because greed will abolish eventually poverty. Now, the opposite is true, as history taught us. Of course, now I have no time to enter into the analytical explanation from an economic point of view. So the point is that we have to consider that poverty today is a case of institutional failure, not of, as I said already twice, because of lack of resources, etc. Institutional failure means the institutions are wrong. And institutions are nothing but the rules of the game. of both economic and, above all, financial gains. And when John Paul II introduced for the first time the notion of structure of sin, he exactly refers to that. What are the structure of sins? Institutions which compel good people to produce nasty results. In other words, people with good intention, if they are inserted in those structures, in those institutions, they are doomed to generate perverse results. So perhaps this is the reason why in recent time we have to reconceptualize. Just to give a simple example, redistribution is not enough. It's necessary, but not sufficient condition. We have to operate via pre-distribution. In other words, changing, as Jeff said this morning, he properly underlined sending children to school, because sending children to schools is a pre-distributive, not redistributive, and many other examples, in particular referring to the health regimes, etc. So this is, to conclude, there is a saying which says, the optimum is the opposite to the good. It's true, because optimum exists only in a first best world. But first best world exists only in the textbook of certain economists. So we had better consider that we live in a second best world. That is why it's proper to aim at the good instead of the optimal solution, which will never be reached. And that is the proper excuse for those who said, oh yes, that is a good idea, but we have to do something else. Let us make now what is possible according to our conditions. Thank you.